Welcome to the FARcast here at Chadron State College. I'm Daniel Binkard here with Alex Helmbrecht and Dr. Jim Powell, who is our new Vice President for Academic Affairs. Jim, welcome to the FARcast. And what are your thoughts on being the VP for Academic Affairs now? New to the job, but what do you hope to bring to the table?
So one of the things I've been thinking about this, but one of the things that has been the driving force for all my higher ed career has been professional development. Actually, my dissertation was about professional development. Everything I've done has been about professional development for educators. I always get excited. I'd tell my undergrads that I was interested in them as undergrads, but I really got interested about what happened in their life professionally after they left college. Because you think about it, you do college from 18 to 22, somewhere in that, Yeah. But in your early 20s, you go out and then you're in a job for 40-some years? What if you never learned anything new? What if you never did anything new? So one of the things I'm real excited about is this opportunity to do some professional development to make sure that all the faculty and staff feel like they've got the tools necessary to grow and develop and become stronger at what we do, which we already do pretty well. So.
But there's always room for improvement,
yes,
right?
There is always room for improvement.
Yeah, I suppose that's probably one of the tenets that we'll talk about later when we talk about accreditation, but continuous improvement. And I think people have a tendency to kind of forget that about themselves. They just work and do their daily tasks and are fine with it. And it sounds like it's kind of a passion of yours to maybe expand on that a little bit.
Yes. And it's real easy to get in the immediacy of the moment. I mean, right now, I know faculty are working hard to make sure they're ready for Monday morning. Students are going to show up Monday morning. Everybody's got to be excited about that. So I know that they're deep into what am I going to do for the classes next week. And the staff are running around making sure that everything's ready for they're going to start showing up on Sunday again. So and it's easy to get caught up into that immediacy and not think about, but what do I want it to look like next fall? What do I want it to look like in 2 years? You see some real development when you work with the Academic Review Committee, because that's when programs get to sit down every 2 years and say, are we where we want to be? Do we need to change stuff? That's always the exciting part.
Great. So I guess how do you see your role as the Vice President for Academic Affairs as it relates to students? Your contact with students may decrease, but how do you see your role advocating for them or working with them? So I resisted administration for a number of years because I like teaching, but when I told someone I got into administration as the same way that I went to higher ed. I love teaching middle school kids, and I really felt like I had a positive impact on middle school kids. And then I realized, but I could have a larger impact if I prepare teachers. Instead of just working with, 150 kids a year, I'm going to work with a bunch of future teachers, and they're going to work with 150 kids. So if I could do that, and I feel this job's the same way, that the goal for the VPAA is to make sure that every student who shows up to Chadron has the opportunity for the optimum academic preparation that we can give them. And so my impact on students is going to be to make sure that, one, they have the opportunity for great classes, but also the opportunity for outside of class stuff. And, I know we'll get into accreditation later, but this co-curricular idea of it's not just what you do in the 15 hours you're in class in a week. It's also what you do outside of class. What kinds of experiential opportunities do you have to expand on what you're learning in the class? That undergraduate, graduate experience has to include both the classroom and outside of classroom, high impact practices.
Sure. And I know those co-curricular experiences are really important to us in college relations. A great example is CSE Live and what Daniel oversees. There's probably 3 or 4 students who've been involved with that who've really kind of used that as a launch pad for their professional
I think of
career.
several students that have gone on and used a lot of the aspects they've learned in CSC Live productions and taken them to the job.
Yeah.
Yeah, just take those opportunities and run with them.
Yeah, and that's what's critical because I was a first generation college kid, so there were a lot of things that I didn't even know were a possibility until you get to college and you're like, oh wait, people pay you to do that?
Yeah, it's nice.
That's a really cool gig. I want to do that. So yeah.
I came from a small high school, and looking at it in the art world, there was very few opportunities in a small high school to really explore that area. Get to college, and you can focus on something. You can take a lot more classes for it, and that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, let's see here. So, Jim, how long have you been the dean here at CSC?
I started in July of 2015.
2015.
So it's been, 4.5 years?
All right.
Yeah.
So you've had some time to see how your predecessor, Charles Snare, does the job. Job comes open as he's retiring. What made you want to apply for the VPAA?
I told the committee that I'm blaming Charles for it. Well,
he's leaving. It's safe.
He's leaving it. Yeah. But honestly, I have had such a rich and rewarding career in education. I mean, I started teaching middle school in 1975, so I've been at it for a while. And every part of it has been really enjoyable. And it's been, I keep saying, the greatest gig in the world, but it has been. And when I got here, we were having a conversation right at the beginning, and Charles looked at me and said, yeah, but your job now is to make sure that the new faculty that we hired this year has that same 40-year opportunity that you have. It's not just about you. It's about what do you leave behind.
Yeah.
And he's been an excellent example of that. And so when that position opened up, I thought, yeah, I want to be sure that when I'm 68, I've probably got about 4 years left. So I want the end of my career to be helping clear that path and make sure that we are positioned where the map wants us to be positioned. The new map is all about people, place, and purpose.
Yeah.
And we've got to be sure that we've got the right definitions and the right actions to make sure that moving forward, that when I come back to visit this place in 30 years, it's still humming right along. So,
well, hopefully it is. Yeah. I know probably one of the professional and maybe even personal tenets for Charles is collaboration, and that was really evident during the 2017 HLC visit and leading up to that. And then, as you mentioned, the new master academic plan with people, purpose, and place. But how important is collaboration to a campus like CSC?
It's critical. I mean, it's just absolutely critical. And I'll go back to when I first started doing professional development schools at the beginning of my career at Ball State. And the hardest thing I had to talk to the faculty about was that we have always gone to K-12 schools and we've said, hey, we want to help you. Here's what we know you need, and here's what we're going to do to help you. You have to change that conversation to say, hey, we're in this together. What do you need? And what do we need to do differently to help you get what you need? And when we started our partnership project here, there was that first moment when the schools looked and said, well, we don't want to do it that way. We want to do it this way. And the faculty were like, I'm not so sure about that. And I said, remember, it's a partnership. And that's what people forget about collaboration, is it is a partnership with equal power on both sides of that relationship. And if you don't have equal power, if the students and the faculty and staff don't have an equal buy-in and an equal space to talk and present ideas, it's not a collaboration then. It's just a really warm, fuzzy, hierarchical organization. If it's collaboration, everybody can bring an idea to the table and be listened to. Not every idea gets accepted, but you do have to listen to all of them. So I think, and that means a lot of listening. For me, collaboration is getting people around the table who are willing to listen to each other. So.
Yeah, and I just think it's such a good thing institutionally that it creates those relationships that then, can be leveraged in several different ways and work out through, a myriad of different possibilities. Yeah. And so nothing bad ever comes from collaboration.
Yeah. No, and I like the sweet spot we're in terms of size. I worked at Ball State for 12 years, and I swear there were people on campus who started the same time I did that I never met. I mean, there were faculty that you might see them at the opening day meeting. You had no idea what they were doing. You had no idea what was going on. Administration was the same way. But that's an institution with about 30,000 students. We have the opportunity for everybody to know each other. And that's what I like. You sit in those committee meetings and you realize you're surrounded by peers who are outside their silo, and to me and you get staff who actually get to participate and bring their ideas to the table, which until I got here was kind of an anomaly also. So.
Yeah, well, it certainly assists us with our department in college relations where we partner with everyone. Yeah. And so to continue to make those inroads is so important.
Yeah.
It feels like there's this whole framework with collaboration, and I think we've got a nice identifiable framework here at CSC with our master academic plan and a strategic enrollment management plan. So for people who wouldn't necessarily be familiar with what those are, could you give us kind of the 30,000-foot view? Give it 30 seconds.
And the $30,000 question.
That's right. Yeah. Wrap it all up in about 2 sentences. MAP's got a nice storied history, and Charles, again, is responsible for that. When in 2014, well, it was actually back in 2012, 2013, they looked at the strategic plan, and they said, this suffers from the same problems most do, and that is you've got 20-some initiatives, and nobody knows what's – and he really worked to say, let's pick 5 or 6 things that we really need to do well.
Yeah.
So that map for 2014 to 2018 had 6 items identified. People were able to look at the projects, and you can go out on the pretty sure everybody's got access to it on the SharePoint and look at the old map, and it's got all the projects listed, what happened with them, and everything. When it got time to renew the map, so we have a new one, 2019 to 2023. They looked at the 6 and they said, what was well, you were on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I wasn't in the committee, but I had a sense that they looked at the 6 previous objectives and said, what's the core of these? And you really got down to the rock bottom, which is people, purpose, and place. Or is people, place. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The 3 Ps.
The 3 Ps. I think our task now is to help define what do we mean by purpose, what do we mean by place, what do we mean by – and SIMP is the way that we're trying to reach out to that. So SIMP is a strategic enrollment management plan. It grew out of a visit. Alex was there with us when we all went off to a conference in Denver, Buffalo Noel Levitt's, and we had 15 people there.
Oh, at least, yeah. There's a lot of CSC folks there for sure.
And we all came back, and it was not just student services side, but there were other staff, there were faculty, and we all came back and said, you know what, we got to get serious about enrollment. And the first thing we started looking at were numbers and retention and so forth. So the SIMP grew out of that was, okay, and we started saying, what do we need to do to recruit kids? What do we need to get them successful in their first year?
Yeah.
And then keep them through the next 3 years and get them graduated. So SIMP is what's going to drive how we define people, place, and purpose. We had a year of planning. We had the year of doing. Last year was kind of the year of assessment. Now we're ready to start that next cycle and say, okay, what are we going to do with strategic enrollment management that from this point on?
Okay, good.
And really involved, both of those projects involved basically everyone on campus.
Yeah. We've all got a hand in it in some way.
Yeah. And so that's a really kind of a crown jewel of CSC's recent collaboration, at least.
Yeah.
You've mentioned accreditation a couple times, and I think Daniel and I have as well. What is it? Why is it important? Why is it so hard to define what you do and to do it in a way that doesn't make it seem esoteric? What is it?
Okay, so accreditation is when you open yourself up to be evaluated by your peers. So we have music is an accredited program, business is an accredited program, education, social work, counseling is going through the accreditation process. But in every one of those instances, you have a team of musicians that look at the music school, you have educators, and you just throw your whole program out there. They all have slightly different formats for reporting information and so forth.
Right.
But you're throwing yourself out there in front of your peers going, what do you think? HLC is the same way. Now, partly accreditation is driven by the feds are putting a lot of money into education, higher ed, and they want to make sure that, that students are getting value for their dollar.
Yeah.
And that's part of the accreditation process also. But I have never been through an accreditation process that wasn't painful, that didn't have you sitting there at one point late at night going, why are we doing this? But at the end of it, I've never been through one where you didn't go, you know what, we learned some stuff. Mm-hmm. We're better for this. And I think the last HLC visit was a classic example of that. We worked so hard to prepare for it. But when they left campus, we were like, look at what we learned, Yeah. So I like accreditation. I like it a lot more if somebody else is doing it, and I just get to watch from the sidelines. But unfortunately, that's not the case. You always have to get in there and roll up your sleeves on it. So
yeah, it definitely requires hard work. Yeah, it's not something that can just be thrown together in a couple weeks.
Well, when people start asking you questions that you have to go find data for, that's when you learn stuff. It's like, ooh, maybe we need to look at that a little better because, whether it's the fact how many students are getting placed after they get out of college, or it's how many people are making it through these transitional English and math courses and moving on successfully. No matter where that data point takes you, you learn something from it. And that's but it's finding the data that's always the part that has you scratching your head going, I know that's somewhere. We got to find it.
Yeah.
Something. Jim, let's talk a little bit about your work history. You've touched on it in the opening of the show here, but what are some high points in your career leading up to CSC? And quite a storied career over the years, I would hope.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of stories about it. I started teaching middle school English in Logansport, Indiana in 1975. I thought I would be a high school English teacher. That's what I prepared for, and I was just all gung-ho. Yeah. And I remember doing my student teaching in Logansport, which was close to where I grew up. And they put me in a sixth grade reading classroom. Now, you got to remember, in 1975, there weren't reading degrees. It was just, you teach English, you could do reading. Mm-hmm. And I had this most brilliant classroom supervisor. I walked in the first day and she said, what do you teach? And I said, I teach English. And she goes, ooh, that's a problem. We all have children here. And I thought, who is this crazy woman and why am I here? And then I thought about it and I thought, oh, yeah, we teach children. We teach children English, but first you teach children.
Right.
And then the second moment when she said, now, they'll want to have their crayons. And I'm like, whoa, time out. Crayons? I'm not. But they did. Sixth graders are in that transition point. And I found out I really love middle school. That was the fun part. And I did that for 6 years, and then hit a point that was in the 80s where, and hardly anybody remembers those days, but inflation was running about 18%, and we were getting about 4% raise every year. And I told my wife, I said, we'll either go bankrupt teaching or I got to do it something else for a living.
Yeah.
And I went into not-for-profit management and worked for a professional association as a continuing ed director. And that's when I fell in love with professional development, because I realized in Indiana when I got my degree, if you got a master's degree after 5 years, you got a life license. I have a life license from Indiana to teach English until they have to cart me out of the classroom. But they never required professional development. It was like, okay, you're 22 years old, you got a degree, you're good for the next 40 years. But when I work for the CPAs, it's like, no, every 5 years you've got to go back to school for so much,
Yeah.
And the lawyers were doing it, doctors were doing it, and I kept thinking, why not educators? Why don't we have something a little more formal than that? And so I did not-for-profit for a while. Ran a national association for a while. And all the time I did conventions, we had great times. But I remember running into a couple of students at that point in my life, and they were talking about what we did in the classroom and I kept thinking, nobody's ever going to say that about a convention that I did. And I went back to teaching. It was kind of one of those moments where, I'm going to take a third less salary now to go back to teaching. But I ended up at the lab school at Indiana State, which was my introduction to being on university faculty. And the dean that year, Hazlitt, who was a brilliant guy, and he looked at me my first year and he said, if you want to make any money in this biz, you got to go get a doctorate. So after 3 years, I went off and I started a doc program. Part of it also was I looked across at a bunch of the people who had doctorates, and I thought, well, how hard can that be? Which you learn to regret those words later when you're sitting there trying to write a dissertation. It's like a lot harder than I thought.
Yeah, I would imagine.
But so I went to Arizona State. I'd gotten my master's at Ball State in linguistics, which I fell in love with late in life, or late in my undergrad career. And teaching English as a foreign language. And then I went off to Arizona State and got a degree in curriculum and instruction, but started working in their professional development school that they were just starting. That was when the Holmes Group really started talking about changing education. And they had a whole bunch of ideas, some of which kind of worked out, some of them which people tried and they didn't, like master teachers. The idea was that you would bring people in from school districts who were master teachers to teach at the college level, bring their expertise in, do that for 2 years, and then go back to the classroom. What they found was they'd come out of the K-12 system and they'd get into college system, and they're like, wait, you don't teach 6 classes a day? You don't? Yeah. And they wouldn't go back. They'd get a doctorate and stay. So that was one of those ideas that didn't work out. I went back to Ball State, kind of on a fluke, but started my higher ed experience there, taught there 12 years. It was good, and I liked Ball State. But after 12 years, it was like, well, do we stay here? The kids had grown up. They were gone. I looked at my wife. We were both kind of like, we could do this till we retire. We could go do something wild. And a job opening came up in Alaska, and I was like, well, always dreamed about Alaska. Let's go try that. And I got up there, and it was wonderful. For the first time in my career, I got to use my English as a foreign language. We worked with 2 groups, the Anungach and the Chupik. Both of them were into language revitalization. Both of them were experiencing, because of boarding schools and a whole bunch of other influences, the death of a language.
Yeah.
So the Chupik is going to be successful. The Anungach, the Eastern dialect, probably not. You get to a point, and we'd go to these conferences, and some of the saddest stories, but you would get to a point where you don't have enough strong bilingual or native speakers left, and they're all 80-some years old. And I remember I was talking to an Inupiat, which is still a really vibrant language with a lot of strong speakers and with a few native speakers. But the old guy was talking to him, and he said, there's just certain parts of the language that are going to be lost because there's hunting language that you only use out on the ice. And the people that know that language are passing every day. And there's language that the women use within, their discussion circles. And those older women are dying, and you don't. So he said, there's going to be words that just never survive. And that's the problem with language revitalization is you can bring it back. But anyway, that was a lot of fun. Enjoyed that for 6 years, a lot. And then it's spring here, early spring, late winter. That got hard. 3.5, 4 hours of daylight a day.
Oh, yeah.
It got hard. And we decided to come south to the lower 48 again. Went to Michigan, Fair State, and that was had a lot of fun. But when I got to Alaska, I'd resisted doing administration, but when I got to Alaska, they needed a chair, so I said, okay, I'll be the chair. And I actually found out I really liked it. So when I went to Michigan, I was the director for the School of Ed. And after 3 years, I thought, I'll never get to be dean here because we were in the college there was mostly criminal justice with education, and the dean was always out of the criminal justice side. And I thought, well, I want to be a dean. I do want to try that. So I came out here, and it's been fun ever since. So,
what's the biggest difference between being an administrator and an educator?
Yeah, that's a hard one because when you're an educator, you've got your content in front of you, and you've got your students, and you're trying to figure out where's the best interface between what the students are bringing to class, what they need to take out of class, and making sure that the content is able to address them where they are, but get them to where they need to be. As an administrator, it's like putting together a picture puzzle. You never know. You come in with a plan every day, and sometimes it survives till noon, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's always like, oh, how do I move these parts around? How do I get this so that we get all the courses covered? How do I make sure that we, find the adjuncts we need? So it's two different beasts.
Yeah.
Sure. It's kind of like saying, what's the difference between farming and ranching? I mean, well, you're both working with crops and animals and land, but there's a significant difference between ranching and farming. So,
what are some of the biggest changes you've experienced in your career in education?
Well, when I started, we didn't have computers.
That's a big one.
Yeah. I tell people, I can say, I remember the first time we taught with a computer. I was at the lab school at Indiana State, and it was an old Apple IIe, I think.
Oh, yeah.
The green screen, and we played Oregon Trail on it,
Oh, that was fun.
Classic game.
Yeah, it was. I think students tend to be students. I think the students we have today have a number of different issues in front of them than when I was going to college. You see a lot more pressure for making sure that I can pay off these loans that I may be taking, that I can actually I went to college and it was like, okay, I'm going to college because that's what you do, and not really thinking about, oh, will I get a job at the end of it? I think the students today are very cognizant of, is this a good investment? Am I getting what I need out of it? I always go back to there was a great educational historian, Larry Cuban, and he said one time, if you pulled somebody up out of the grave that died in 1900, there's only 3 places you could take them that they would feel comfortable. a church, a bar, and a school. Because other than the electric lights and some of the other stuff that's going on, you look at a schoolroom today, and it doesn't look radically different than a schoolroom of 120 years ago. And I think some of our challenge is the students are coming in with a whole different expectation and mindset around how you learn. And for those of us who grew up back in the day when libraries had card catalogs, and that was the only, I'd tell people, I'd tell my students when I was going to school, if you told me something, the only way I could figure out is if that was true was to trot down to the library, hope they had the book, look it up, and find out. I said, now they sit in the back of the class and Google it and go, no, that's not right. So that's a significant difference. Anyway.
Yeah, Google has definitely been a game changer.
They really have closed the feedback loop. I think and when we switched from film photography to digital photography, the feedback loop just closed immensely because you could see if you had gotten it.
Yeah.
And same way, now with education, being able to double check things.
Yeah. And knowledge is a much more shared experience now. It used to be the teacher was the repository and they handed it out. Now it's a co-constructed event. So.
It just reinforces that lifelong learning aspect, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of shared experiences, how do you see CSC's role as it situates itself inside this Western Nebraska region?
I think that we've got a couple of things that we need to be cognizant of, and we're on the right track. We're developing a very strong relationship with Western Nebraska Community College. Starting to look at how do the two institutions together prepare people for the region. One of the things that the state has to be aware of is it's really hard, and Alaska was the same way. You didn't get people to get an education degree or a dentist degree and then go out to a remote village and expect them to make a career out there. They'd be good for a year or two, but then they're like, yeah, this is too different, and they would come in. If you want people to work in Western Nebraska, they have to love Western Nebraska, and that's our residents. I think we lose a lot of young people because they look around and they're like, well, I'd love to stay here, but can I get a job here?
Yeah.
And that's part of our challenge is to make sure that we're preparing the people for the jobs that are here and helping people find niches to create jobs in the area. So we have to one of the things that somebody pointed out is the growth in this area right now is people who are retiring and moving back home. And you get a lot of that where people are like, I never wanted to leave, but I had to go get a job, but now that I've retired, I can come back. Our task is to make sure that they can get a job, that they can find a job. And we're not in the job creation business, but we're in the preparing students who will be creating jobs business. Yeah. So that's, I think, part of what that purpose is for us.
Yeah, great answer.
Yeah. Jim, tell us, what are some of your interests outside of work?
Well, I do fishing and woodworking. We've always been an outdoors family, and which one of the rare treats about Chadron was when I applied for the job, I knew it was Nebraska, and I called a friend who was teaching at the University of Lincoln, and I said, what do you know about Chadron? And he goes, oh, it's the crown jewel in the state college system. I'm like, he had to explain what a state college system was. I was like, wait, it's not a university. But I came out here, and I love the area. We were looking to get to the west, and I drove in from Rapid City, and I was like, oh, my gosh, this is gorgeous here. Yeah. But it was after I lived here or moved here, I've caught more trout here than I ever did in Alaska, or I caught more salmon in Alaska, but or Michigan, which has some fabled trout waters. I've seen more wildlife. I got out here and I was like, you've got elk and bighorn sheep, and so for us, the ability to camp and hike and fish has been really, really good. And I like woodworking. I enjoy getting out in the shop and and just kind of losing myself.
What are some of the things you make?
Well, right now, I've got an ongoing dollhouse project for my 7-year-old granddaughter that was supposed to be done 9 months ago, but it's almost there. I'm down to hanging the doors on it now, so it's about done. But every time I start on it, it's like, oh, I could improve that. I could do that a little different. So, but I've got to turn loose of it now because I've got another granddaughter I promised the granddaughters that when they graduated from first grade, I'd build them a dollhouse. I got to get this one done because the oldest one's about to finish second grade. So I got to get ready for the next one.
Yeah, clock's ticking.
That's right.
Is that the primary type of woodworking project you like to do? Or
oh, no. I mean, we renovate the house.
Sure.
So that's a lot of fun. For a number of years, I worked on a lathe and I made fids of all things. I love making fids. And if you've ever been a knot tyer, a fid is a tool that you use to untie knots.
Oh, nice.
And they've got a really cool shape to them, and you can do some really neat stuff with them. So I made fids.
Yeah, I've never heard that word.
I'll show you a fid sometime.
Okay.
I want to see this. We always learn something new.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jim, we've reached the point of the interview where we're at the 5 quick hitting questions.
Okay.
So, first thing that comes to your head, just go ahead and say it. Now, Jim, what's a favorite book or a favorite author of yours?
Oh, wow. I'm an English major. Why would you ask me that?
That's why we asked you.
Actually, though, I'd have to say late in my reading, I fell in love with nonfiction. And I especially love a guy named John McPhee. Every book that man writes, I will go and buy it and read it. He is awesome. So that's what I'll stand with.
Okay.
All right. What's one of your favorite movies?
We're just coming out of the season, so it's either Miracle on 34th Street or It's a Wonderful Life. I mean,
there you go.
I can't go through Christmas without seeing one of those. I think I've seen him now for 40 years in a row, but it's like, you can almost cite the dialogue on it. So
yeah, those two are on my list. I've never seen either of them all the way through.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I need to do that.
Oh, Alex.
I know. Jim, first concert you attended?
First concert I attended? I got to think about this. Was it Chicago or was it? I was at Indiana University, fall of '69. So it was either Chicago or it would have been, it had to be Chicago. That would have been it.
All right.
It's a great time for live music in the late 60s.
Yeah.
How many times have you been up to the top of Sea Hill?
Actually, only once.
Well, once is still a good number.
Yeah. Been up there once, right after Carla got here, and we were walking the cross country path, and I was like, we ought to go up to the top of the hill just to say that we've done it. So yeah.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting. You get to the top of the sea, and then there's kind of a false summit.
Yes.
You have to keep going.
Well, we were backpacking at a scout camp, Philmont, which is in New Mexico, and you quickly learn that you'd look ahead and you'd be like, oh, we just got to get there, and then it's downhill, and you'd get there, and it's like, no, there's another one.
That's funny how that works, isn't it?
It's the worst. Okay, Jim, last one. What is the word that comes to your mind when you think of Chadron State?
Caring. So, and it's a great place in that every conversation is kind of focused on what's good for students here. And because people care about students and they care about education. So it really is a teacher's college. Now, I'm probably just offended all the liberal arts and business people, but, it's what we do. We're a teaching college. So.
Well, great. Well, thank you for taking the time with us today, and best wishes to you in this new role at the college.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
All right.